Hello, everybody. Welcome to Feedback for the week of February 7th. A very special feedback. One of the things that I get most excited about this show as it continues to evolve is that we've had more of the opportunity over the last couple months to have people that we respect in the industry come on, and we can grill them and skewer them and hold them over the coals. But we have a very unique situation here. We've got a couple people from Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning who actually, when they were coming in to do some stuff for X-Play, said, hey, we'd really like to do feedback. And that makes people like Morgan and I feel very special, and we really appreciate that. And we thank both of you for being here today. First of all, internationally celebrated game designer, Mr. Ken Rolston.
Only slightly twitched on the delivery. Very nice, though, in general.
It doesn't roll off the tongue as well as you want it to, but I'm also very
drunk.
drunk.
For me, believe you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. And then Joe Quadara. Yes. Not as internationally celebrated, apparently, but still a hell of a lead combat designer.
Not yet,
Soon to be internationally
Yes.
celebrated.
When I drink Ken's blood, I will get his powers.
Yes, yes.
And the sad thing is that's true and scary, and that makes me a little terrified. But guys, thank you so much for being here. Usually on the show, we'll do a bunch of news stories about what happened that week, but because we have you guys on, what we did is we just opened up our forums to questions about your game. We got hundreds of questions, most of which we're not going to expose you to because they are scary and sexual in nature, and that would be very weird for Morgan. So we won't talk about those, but we do work together.
Not weird for Ken.
Not weird for Ken.
Not weird.
No, that if we could just freeze that smile on your face, that would go a long way. But we're going to kind of try to group the questions into categories, and the first group of questions. Actually, before we start, and this is something that that personally I wanted to know a little bit about, Ken. You've done some amazing things, so much so that you should just stay retired. Why did you come back, sir? What do you have to prove?
That's a great question in the sense that it is stupid to do that when you can just sit around and have fun and play games all day and not have your wife hate you because you're working all the time. But it turned out that they kept drawing me back in, like you'll find in some really bad movies. I worked for Bestsoft, wonderful place to work, great products. But it turned out that when I went to Big Huge Games for the first time to interview, these are old friends of mine, and I'm walking up and down the halls, and I see the largest ratio of guitars per unit office, and acoustic guitars were about 50-50 with electrics. Totally not what's happening. So I was so excited. And one of the first nights, we went back to Brian Reynolds' house, Tim Train and a bunch of other guys, and we sang Desolation Row, Bob Dylan's Desolation Row, from memory. So this is that kind of thing. Oh, my God, these are my people.
Yeah, I've connected with
These
a
are
group.
my people.
Yeah.
So I wasn't actually retiring. I was retiring out of retirement into heaven. And it has turned out to be that way in terms of the people I'm working with and the amazing properties that I'm getting to work on. And the chance to do something I always wanted to do is to make a game, a role-playing game, where the suck button was off in the console on combat. So that was my dream.
Which is a great way to start the development cycle. Turn off the suck button and then build from there.
It's like the caps lock button. You have to make sure it's off.
Yes.
Otherwise, your passwords don't work.
Absolutely.
I do want to ask you how you got your start in the industry.
I was teaching high school, and there was a thing called Dungeons and Dragons, which I had heard about vaguely. And then I decided I'd write a couple articles for a Dragon magazine. And it turned out that I was a better writer than anybody on earth in the industry at that time because I was an English teacher. What happened was when I sent it a manuscript, it didn't horrify the eyes of the editors. And the editors, in fact, had just created a style sheet at TSR, which told everybody exactly how everything had to be. I sent in a submission, and it was better than any internal documents.
Really?
So I had the moral high ground on everybody like that.
I'm better than everyone. You should hire
so
me.
Totally better,
Yes.
and that encouraged me to actually be genuinely better. I wasn't initially better, but I did eventually figure out how to be a living god. And once I was a living god, it's really hard to stop.
Right.
It really.
Do you? I mean, you must take a certain amount of pride in the fact that you were the first and could quite possibly be the last great dragon writer.
I have scheduled for a meeting of the FOGEY, Fogey, Fraternal Order of Gaming's Elder Youth. And there are a number of us, scary old people who are still doing computer games. And I am so proud to be among the last dragon riders. Yeah, that's pretty pretty heroic.
That's awesome. And then Joe, for you, and we love the game on XPlay. We have covered it since the minute that you guys announced it. We've covered the hell out of it. This game is coming out a couple of months after a holiday season that was filled with one very gigantic role-playing game. But I love the fact that you're here because as the lead combat designer on this game, I know the thing that we take away from every time we see this game, the one thing that we really feel most strongly about is how good the combat feels and how much different it is than everything else out there. And I think that's important coming on the tails of something like Skyrim. So approaching your job, I mean, as the lead combat designer, you are in charge of one of the more important parts of this game right now.
Yeah, it's a really scary baby to put up there on an altar and try and say the game's going to be all about this thing. But I don't know. I didn't know anything about RPGs when I came to the big, huge. So it's sort of like a two-way thing. I get to learn about RPGs, and then I get to teach everybody about action games, and hopefully we make something awesome with it.
Right.
And then halfay through development, we were like, yes, we got it.
We have found something. The suck button is indeed off.
Yeah.
So you started out in action games.
Oh, totally. I was a hardcore Tekken player, like in tournaments and stuff, before I was even in the industry. So by the time I was in the industry doing production and design, I was still playing lots of action games and Tekken and trying to get as many fighting game mechanics into the games that I was playing.
Mm-hmm. Now, we could obviously follow up on all of this, the entire show, but we do want to open it up to the fans. So let's ask some of their questions. The first one, this category is kind of the art of the RPG. You know, really RPGs allow gamers to embody something that they don't get to experience in real life unless you do know dragons, in which case call me because your life is awesome. We'll start with Kagubla Spork.
I wanted to let you ask that one.
Kagubla Spork, maybe?
Kagubla Spork.
I don't see an accent aigu.
Don't you speak Kagubla Spork?
I do not speak Kagubla Spork. Now I do. But he or she or it wants to know, what do you think makes RPGs so addictive? Is it the discovery of new places, powers, weapons, etc., the feeling of becoming more powerful as you level up, or is it the story and characters? As a man in charge of story and characters, what do you think about that?
The great thing about that question is that it answers all it answers the question by giving you an important checklist. And if any of those things are missing in a role-playing game, they don't work as role-playing games. They don't make you feel great. But I would add to that the first discovery. Like if you've ever played Monopoly, you play the game and it's over. Mm-hmm. And the great discovery with role-playing games is that game is never over. It is such a long experience, such a deep world to explore. And starting off with paper and pencil role-playing games, creating that expectation that you can play every night for years is really the birth of a world big enough to have open world gaming. You would not have open world gamings without that role playing thing. So it's that expectation of a long experience as an individual exploring your character, as you have mentioned in some other cases. That's the thing that makes it amazing and special.
Right. And then what are the challenges at this point? We've been exposed to RPGs that do check off all of these boxes. How hard is it to make sure that you put focus on every single aspect of this game? I mean, I know you pretty much compartmentalized your working on the combat, but I assume you have to be involved in other parts of the game to make sure that everything is gelled together.
Yeah, I mean, everything I touch is camera, animation, so I'm touching all the NPCs, how they interact with the world, the activities that they do. So that goes right into the quests and the dialogue, and then we start working on the systems and all the reagents you can pick up in the game. So my tendrils go out about as far as my brain can, but then somebody else has to pick up the rest. So like I need a guy like Ken to start managing all the story. And there's so many people that know so much about the game, but it's so big. I don't think there's anybody in the company that can tell you everything about the game because it's just that big.
Well, also like RPG combat just, tends to fall into sort of two different paradigms, like the turn-based or the non-turn-based. Like how do you kind of take that same feeling that people are very familiar with, but try to mix it up?
That's a tough one, but I honestly, it's trying to make it just as much fun as everything else in the game. Because what I've been talking with Ken about is like we would get into combat in other games and the pacing would just change of the game. And there's a way that I would want to play through the game and I would get to combat and then my game would slow down. Or I wouldn't really be role-playing the way that I felt I should be role-playing. I'd have to do a lot more just sort of suspension of disbelief to get to act out the combat that I really wanted it to. So what I wanted to do was get the action on screen of how I feel combat should really be, spectacular and badass.
if you're going to create a separate life for yourself, you need to be a badass in that life.
Yeah.
If you can't, like me, be a badass in real life, you want to feel good about having a battle axe in your hands.
You need to see it and feel it, and that's what Joe's, fighting games and action games. They come from an experience where that is the currency. Like in role-playing games, it isn't the currency. It's a long, languid study of your inventory, a reflection on whether you're going to go back to town and unload all that stuff for some money or try to go save the princess. Whereas we don't, you don't have that luxury in an action or fight game. So you focus on things that we, as role-playing game designers, maybe ought to have paid more attention to.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you say that because Muslim. Muslim actually has kind of a follow-up question to that. What counts as an RPG anymore, since we're seeing RPG mechanics used in mostly everything? And I think that's probably a little too general of a statement, but we are seeing traditional RPG mechanics being used in a ton of different games these days. So,
yeah. How do you define an RPG anymore?
Exactly.
Because we talked about RPG elements moving into action games. And really, I think some of these games that have RPG elements are more RPG than some of the RPGs that we're marketing as RPGs. So it really sort of tells me we need to start breaking down the framework into some different language and vocabulary. RPG doesn't cut it anymore for me, but that's everything counts as an RPG. That's the big problem, or the answer to Muslim's question.
Right. And I always want to know this when we get guys like you in. At this point in the game, because you are designing something that the definition of what these genres are become a lot more fluid as the years go on, how much of the decision to market it as an RPG is made by you, and how much of the development team, and how much of it is made by the actual marketing people who say, hey, there's a space to fill. We need to make sure that people assume that this is the type of game we're making.
That's an interesting question that would never have occurred to me, because I don't think anyone in marketing would ever say, let's make ourselves a role-playing game, because the first thing they'd say, that's a stupid idea, because it's
too big and too expensive.
It's too expensive, too risky. It requires special skills, and it's all about content creation. There's just so much content you have to create. So it's a specialized thing. People who want to make money don't think about how I can there's no get rich quick scheme of making RPGs. But for us, we knew that we had to market it as a role-playing game, because that's what we wanted to do.
Right.
But our challenge was figuring out how to guarantee that it was a role-playing game for the audience that we've already identified, that we share these dark yearnings for, wandering around after dragons and things like that. Those people had to be well served. They could not be betrayed, because they would come after me with guns and pickup trucks and stuff like that. But at the same time, they don't know that they're suffering, because they're like me. They've been playing role-playing games since the dawn of time, and since the tabletop, the talking was always great, the role-playing and things like that. And the pace was good, and the interaction was good. Once it got to the tabletop, little figures moving and things like that, it slowed down, arguments about rules, so that the flow is the most important thing in an experience. It was never there. And it was never there even in turn-based games. They were more like strategic games. There was no visceral flow. Even when you get to the real-time games, they're better, but we still accept that as the standard. And it only just occasionally occurs to me, like when I'm playing our game, holy cow, there's no reason, it couldn't have been this way a long time ago if someone had a brilliant idea and then also built a company and the people to make it work.
Right. Look, I think a lot of credit, first of all, we should give a lot of credit to Nicole, who's over here in the corner, for picking out these great questions, because all of these questions seem to lead into what you guys are talking about right now, because Goat Trek actually has a great question that I think will be great to ask both of you, because I think you'll have different answers for this. Obviously, Ken, having been in the game longer, from creating pen and paper RPGs to creating video games, how did your view on fantasy and RPGs change over the years? What are some of the more important, interesting things you've learned over the years that you're now applying to Reckoning? And then, Joe, to you, just to expand on that, now that you're making an RPG, having come from the other side of things, how have your views of RPGs changed as well after working on these projects? And Ken, we'll start with you.
Well, the most important thing is I've been playing role-playing games since the dawn of time, and I've always been frustrated with combat, and have never once felt it my responsibility to fix the problem. Because I'm a narrative designer,
Sure.
I don't bring anything to the experience about talking about that. If I had only just cried and screamed and kicked my tiny feet on the ground and said, please, somebody do this.
And they say crying at work is bad.
An embarrassing.
A tantrum might have been one. It's all I could have done because I don't have those skills. And God knows why it is now that partly it's my opportunity because I have all that experience. I have street cred in the role-playing thing so that people would not suspect I would make a sucky role-playing game. So that, we start off with something, and then we start off with, Bob Salvatore and Todd McFarlane, who have a certain currency
Sure, a little bit.
In the mainstream. And then what happens is somebody like Joe and all the animators come along and give me what I want. I couldn't tell them what I want. I was too stupid to fight the chains that I've been wearing along because, like an orc, I was proud of carrying those chains. So now that I've been released into the atmosphere, to have fun with the game and to bang on things, I still haven't exhausted my excitement. I still don't know what to do when I'm playing. I say, am I going to do this because it's cool or that because it's cool? Oh my God, that looks so cool. I just want to look at what I did. I'm not even thinking, do I want to win? Do I want to get more stuff? It's the theater, the visual part, which I keep forgetting and which Joe always reminds me about. It has to look awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really my answer is that the next phase for RPGs that I'm trying to apply to it is just presentation and just making sure everything looks and feels really strong. There's something about the way that we've landed a hit so that it feels, and you feel it in the controller and you feel it on the screen and the screen shake and it looks like it hurts. And I want to do that with everything from our diving into water or just running through the streams or acting stealthy. There's a feel to the movement that we really like with the camera, and we just want to apply that to everything now.
Yeah, I want to ask how you actually accomplish something like that, because we've all played games where you feel like you're not actually completing that hit, but you can't figure out why. You feel like you're not hitting very hard.
Is it one frame of animation? Like, what's going on?
Is it sound or what is it?
One of the most basic things that I haven't seen in any RPGs in a long time is just good hit reacts. And if I swing a sword and it connects with somebody's neck, I want to see that enemy stop what he's doing and throw his head back and blood gush out of it. But really all that they're doing is he's just keeps walking at you and maybe some blood comes out and maybe there's a sound effect. They could maybe do some screen shake, but you never see the reaction of the guy that you hit. And that is half the hit right there.
I mean, he should be bummed. You're right.
Yeah,
he should be bummed that he just got a sword to the neck.
Yeah, and he would indeed stop what he's doing and try to and react to the giant sword in his neck.
Yes.
I also love the fact that we live in a world where Ken can say something like street cred in the RPG genre, and that's not an oxymoron. That actually, you do actually have street cred in the RPG world. Morgan, why don't you take the second category, talking about how it's a new IP and the development and things like that, because there's a bunch of really interesting questions in here that if I ask in my voice, you guys might be offended, but since Morgan is much nicer than I am, you might take it in a different way.
We'll be kinder.
Really
Ask in my Tiny Morgan voice.
In my Tiny Morgan voice. Tiny Morgan's from the South.
Yes,
Also,
clearly.
she sounds just like Mr. Hanky the Christmas poo.
Ooh, sweet.
Okay, so let's start with Oso Blue Jacket. I think we talked about this a little bit, about how retain sort of the fans who want the more hardcore experience while also appealing to newcomers. We touched on it a little bit, but maybe we can expand on it.
Yeah, the question is really, he's asking, are the hardcore, how do we retain the hardcore RPG fans while still appealing to a newcomer? And for me, it's really, we did the inverse of that. We really are trying to appeal to the hardcore RPG fans while showing them something new that they've never played before. So tell them this really is a deep RPG. There's crunchy numbers and all sorts of great systems for you to sink your teeth into, and dialogue and story, all the stuff that you know and love, but the combat we've tilted on its ear, and it's going to be fun. And so that's sort of the twist that we give it.
Do I get to do math?
You can do math. Oh, yeah. There's lots of math.
Oh, I love doing math for a game.
We are
I really
designers.
do. No, I really do.
But you guys have Battleaxes and Magic, right?
Yeah.
I'm still in. Okay, cool. I'll still play the game. I got scared for a second. Ken, how important is it? Obviously, it's important to always make sure that you keep your particular fan base in mind. But we talked about this, obviously, before we started doing the podcast. One of the things that BioWare did, and Lucas with SWOTOR, is that they said, we're going to make an MMO. World of Warcraft is a giant juggernaut of a game. We are not trying to take this game down. We're trying to make a game that's as good as their game, but introduce new people to it as well. And to me, that says that they had to pay attention to the people that didn't understand the genre when they were developing. So how hard is it to find the balance between speaking to the hardcore, like you said, but also having the balls to introduce something new and hoping that that actually makes sense both on a financial and a creative level?
My strategy is always to look for the chains that the hardcore player has endured for so long and has, with a Puritan sense of hard work, like, I deserve to have fun even though this is painful to do. Look for those things where it's awful. For example, our interfaces in role-playing games are almost always terrible. Moving through inventory. Find all the places where those experiences are not fun and the role player doesn't notice because he's never had a choice.
Right.
And casual players don't play a game that say, wow, I have to do all this stuff. Oh, my God, what are all these buttons here? What's going on? And filled with outrage when they have to press 4 or 5 buttons deep into a menu to get something. Well, I think they're right. And I've never done anything about it, and in the big, huge games is really interested in user testing and user experience. So it turns out they're perfect for saying, don't accept a second-rate interface or user experience just because you're a tough orc.
Right.
And that, I think, to make a game casual, all you do is you make sure you give them familiar elements that they want. The genre elements, like in a Western, there's a hitching post, there's a bar, and there'll be guns.
Right.
So, okay, I'm happy here. We'll give them those things, but then say it's not going to be painful to have that experience. It's not going to be long and boring, and the talk isn't going to go on forever, and you won't be able to skip dialogue. Just, there have to be ways to compress the experience for those guys who want to go fast, but at the same time, there's the choice to go leisure. And like my pilgrim character is the character who doesn't want to win. He wants not to die. He wants to go everywhere, open every book. And that's the character who is probably not the hardcore character, but I think it models some of the experiences that are unique to role-playing games, and that a casual player would say, I just want to go everywhere and do everything. That'd be really cool. And if I'm running from something sometimes, that's kind of cool too.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I mean, I feel like, BioWare really hit on that. I remember when Mass Effect 2 came out, one of the first things they started talking about was the fact that they made the inventory system more manageable.
Oh, yeah.
And BioWare has done a great job of doing well for themselves. Yeah.
Inscrutable.
And
I play a lot of games, and I had to come to work and be like, how does that thing work?
Yeah, we don't know what's going on. But like you said, it's those things like that really can make an experience that much better.
And I've never understood, because menus, I feel like a good menu system is basically free, right? I mean, that's not expensive art or expensive animation or all this stuff. I feel like that's something easy you could do for the game.
No, it
There's that
turns
smile
out,
again.
in fact, that it's a nightmare. And by the way, it's a nightmare even in an action game. But there's only a small number of issues. Like there isn't so much information it hasn't got layers of abstraction that you have to navigate to it. We have so many systems. The role-playing games has every kind of system in the world. There's a wander around systems, pick lock systems, make alchemy and stuff like that, and making different menus for all the different experiences in your life. What you do is so complicated. Your hands and your mind does so many things. And role-playing games, when they're good, they do those things. That's what makes those interfaces bad. It's not like we're mean-spirited in role-playing. It's a very, very hard, and I think generally unsolved problem. We spend a lot of time working on it, and we fail a lot and then fix it. What we need to do to better get better games in that sense is to, in our development cycle, expect to fail a lot and to care about that and to work on it over and over and over again with user testing.
Right. It's a smart thing to do. Morgan, what else do we have?
Let's see. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Echo Pirate, but we can talk about this.
Yes.
Do you think that the action-based combat in Core
Core is what the kids are calling it, you guys.
as the kids say, which is much easier than what we say, which is Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, will help breathe new life into RPGs, which have have traditionally had clunky combat. I don't think that that's necessarily true across the board that RPGs have had clunky combat, but yes, sir.
It has all been bad.
Yeah,
And again,
agree.
it's what I think about what Todd Howard used to tell me when we used to finish an Elder Scrolls game. He says, you just finished the game. Don't forget now, that's whatever it is that we just did is and it's time for you to think about the thing that would be really good. And what I'm really hoping, my secret goal in all this is that we would get so much plagiarism that essentially people would see what we had and immediately start filing the serial numbers off it and trying to figure out how to implement it. And I would smile complacently at them and say, but we have the people who understand how to do it.
We made that.
That's
true. I mean, and while I'm not going to say that like across the board it's been terrible, but when somebody does it right, that tends to get a little more recognition than the times where it's wrong. And again, this is you, man. This is on your shoulders.
Joe
this
is
is
the
your
man.
channel.
Joe,
No
Joe,
pressure,
Joe,
bro.
Joe.
Yeah. The thing that I see about it, like as far as breathing new life, though, specifically, is the fact that you can go into Reckoning and role play yourself in a combat setting where normally you have to role play a warrior or a rogue or a sorceress or sorcerer, and that's sort of the thing that you do. But now you can play, I am Joe Quadara, the might finesse hybrid, and I use harpoon to pull enemies into me, and I use lunge to dash through them and smack them in the back, and then I taunt them and run away. But whatever it is, that's how I play the game, and that's going to be completely different how you play the game and how Morgan plays the game and Ken plays the game, and I love that part because it's true role playing for me.
Right. It's great for me, too, because I tend to play 10 hours of something and then decide that is not how I want to play, and then I have to go back and start all over, and I'm really bitter for the next 10 hours. So this is good news for somebody like me.
Did we mention we have respecking?
What?
For only a couple dollars. And that is just so bizarre to me. It's another one of the
Not
chains
real
that
dollars,
I
of
have
course.
always worn
Fake dollars.
freely.
Yeah. Oh, so there's microtransactions.
Fake dollars.
Smart guys. I see what you're
oh,
doing
God,
there.
no, thank you.
You
I
milked
did
that
not.
fan
I could
base.
see the eyes of the EA
Just give me
people
your credit card number.
hitting the ceiling again. Ken's off in the weeds. But no, it's... You just go pay a few gold coins from which I don't have a lot of in the real world, in the game world, and you can change all the features of your character so that you. Now, the interesting thing, by the way, that I think is delicious about this is you've already bought a lot of your gear for that other concept. So there's a price there that's not obvious. But at the same time, you probably, because you're anal retentive about playing and you've got too much money now, you say, damn, I can go shopping now because I got a totally new body. And I can think of some women in my acquaintance who would think that would be a very exciting prospect.
Oh, I'm not afraid to admit that in Saints Row the Third, I spent more time dressing my character than I did playing that game. And that is not a knock on the game. The game is great. I just like being able to dress my character.
And that was something that Saints Row did, is that you could change your character and you could change a lot about the character, which was really fun. And you're like, why do other games say, once you've made a character, you can never, ever change it? Really? Is that impossible to do? Is there something that has to do with the game that makes it impossible to change it in the future?
We
I don't
are,
get it.
technically speaking, idiots. And we have just... Well, it's like orcs. Orcs can be idiots because you can't kill them. Yeah, they're really tough and cheerful about bleeding. And as hardcore players, we have enjoyed... I think we have taken... I don't want to be actually ironic or cynical about this. I think it's a place where a person can work really hard and succeed. And there are action games and fight games where working hard won't help. You have to have some entry-level ability and talent. But I think in a role-playing game, you can always be the guy who does his homework. Like I was just despise those people in high school because I wanted to always win because I was clever or sneaky or treacherous or
treacherous in high school.
Dishonest
Huh?
or whatever it is like that.
To have as a high schooler.
Yeah, but that's what's great about role-playing games is you can do that. One of the things about a role-playing game like we have is that we still guarantee you that if you are just a hard worker, you understand role-playing games, you'll be able to have way too much fun. It's just that delightful extra thing is if you want to be really clever and really good, you can go kill things faster and cheaper than anything else and then look awesome.
Yeah.
And the ability to look awesome doesn't blow.
Absolutely.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a fascinating point, and this goes back to us talking about how genres tend to, now the lines are blurring, but basically what you just said is that Saints Row the Third, a traditional third-person action adventure game, just addressed and fixed a problem that RPGs have. And that's really, really interesting that we work and live in an industry now where people are learning from these types of things. And I don't think that's something 5 years ago. People would not look at something like Saints Row the Third and say that, some of the things they're doing in this game would have maybe made Skyrim better. But we live in a world now where that could be true.
It's a bitter burden, though. That means we have to play all the games and not just play them for fun. We have to play them to understand their logic. And Saints Row is brilliant, and it's a humor game.
Yeah.
Now, and they only slowly discovered what that is. And there aren't many. It's the hardest thing, I think, to do in gaming. And their discovery of that, I think that might be some room. I don't think there's a good humorous role-playing. I take it back. Death's Bank is a great, maybe the only place where I can say that the dialogue was actually delicious. I loved the dialogue.
Yeah, Thong of Virtue, you can't go wrong with a sub.
Thong of Virtue.
That
Awesome.
speaks volumes about how great that game is. Morgan, why don't we pick one more from this category, and then we can move on to the next one.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. Jerry...
Yes! Thanks for asking this one. I was hoping you would.
Oh, okay.
I love this one.
That was a setup. Jerry WJ, in creating a new IP, how much thought is given to creating the universe that the game takes place in? Are Bibles / design staples created in the pre-production phase of development?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is obvious to me, so Joe's going to answer this question because he has a refreshing perspective on it.
Coming into this game, we were able to sort of take all of this lore and IP that RIA was able to write about. I know you guys have talked about this before, but it's worth mentioning again. It's that he wrote this 10,000-year history for the entire Kingdoms of Amalur setting. So we have this timeline of where we are able to sort of pick and choose where we want this game to exist. So now we've got this big, huge timeline with all these hooks of races, and within each time, you have factions and warring in wars and magic entering the world, which is right where we're at, which we're at the age of Arcana, where magic is just now entering the world, and you have races of creatures that have never been able to use magic before, and they have this rudimentary form of magic. So that's where we get to tell our story. And now all of our narrative designers, we have so many writers all filling in all these little hooks that is just making this world believable and all tying into the future of the MMO, which is ridiculous to me. So everything I make has a backstory. Every weapon has a story. Every attack move that I do has a name because it's been named by some warrior in the past, right? So it's ridiculous how much lore goes into this game.
God, I just keep thinking of the Sword of Truth. Like, the veil has been torn and Richard has crossed over, and now there's magic in this half of the world, and that is the nerdiest thing I will say today. And I'll also ask this for Nicole. It's very true. Nicole's over there in the corner, and she really wants me to ask you, will you please publish that Bible, and when will we be able to buy it?
What an evil, evil person you are. That is a sneaky question that nobody's ever asked before. That's a crime against man and nature.
A leather-bound tome we can put on a pedestal.
Seize him!
Her fault.
Okay. No, but it's a great question. Number one, it can never be published, and I'm not talking about whether it would be good at marketing or selling it. It can never be published until the game has lost its currency. It's like we used to have a rule at lunches. You could not talk about a current movie unless everybody had currently seen it. I mean, there have to be rules about stuff like that. So we have things called franchise mysteries. The whole suspense of the world in a single game is on what you think happens in the end. We're so ahead of the enemy because we got 10,000 years, and it's going to be worked out in many different arenas and in many different ways by lots of different people. Wow, what an asset that is. We have to guard the suspense so carefully. And the other important thing is, if you were to read the Bible, you might discover something that we don't want you to know. That is, that there is not one single truth.
What?
You may have always thought, because you're used to reading books and stuff like that, and they always have a single ending. That's what great art is about. It turns out that a great role-playing setting designer creates 4 mutually exclusive final truths, and they are all consistent with the evidence that you experience in the world. In other words, like in our real world, it's impossible to tell what the truth is. And then what you do is you divide among your designers deeply troubled people who will become passionate believers and will believe this number 1 is true,
the truth.
number 2 is true, number 3 is true, number 4, so that there's always heretics and untruth. And you maintain that stuff. And the delicious thing we don't want you to know is sometimes those aren't ideas we've invented. Some fan has, after playing a game, will said, I wonder if this is, I wonder if that is really those bones of the mountain. I bet that's really a rocket ship. And we say, oh, that's a bad idea. That's obviously true. And then a new heresy is born.
Right.
And that's really important. So to get back to your basic question, awesome idea. We'll hand that on to the creative people. Yeah.
The Star Chamber where it will never happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
We have one of those too.
Ideas will die. Hooray!
That's where I read a lot of my VO for some reason.
And a good thing.
A quick follow-up to that before we move on to the last category, which you will also take,
I'm
young
excited.
lady, is how important is it, though, at some point to start servicing that group of your audience that does require that additional content? And by that, I mean Halo at this point as a franchise. When a new game is announced, people are very excited about it, but there's so much stuff being generated about Halo that I think the game franchise itself is a little diluted now because there's books and there's, the toys and all these other things. And when you have a guy like Todd McFarlane obviously on board, one would assume that the toys and things will eventually come because he's got an amazing company that makes amazing toys. But, how long do you hold back on maybe publishing some fiction, that goes alongside with this game?
Luckily, you're in a situation where you have experienced people managing that stuff, and it isn't just in a marketing sense, it's in a narrative sense.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that Bob Salvatore said is that he's interested in doing the gaming work he's doing now because though he is a master of the print trade, he suspects that games are the new literature.
Really?
And he wants to get involved in that sense. And, of course, he won't have a solution to this impossible problem that nobody has foreseen how to handle it. But what I think you want to do is you always want to create amazing problems that never happened before and then have way too talented people with way too much energy and no judgment so that they can just crash and thrash around brute force and come to those solutions.
Right. I think it's a great thing for our industry that Mr. R.A. says, hey, this is the wave of the future. That is a good sign, not only for fantasy people, but the gaming industry in general.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the future of the RPG.
What?
I mean, it's a tiny topic that I'm sure we'll cover in 4 minutes, 2 minutes, maybe.
Which is great. We'll have to stretch it to about 20, so try to be a little long-winded in your answers.
We did
gentlemen.
bring alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I have got a drip. I got a drip into the artery in my leg. You guys don't have that?
I think we should start with Falcon's question, but with a K, Falcon.
Very fancy.
Why are we still, after 30 plus years, still chasing dragons? Because dragons are awesome. Okay, sorry. And zombies in RPGs. How do you expect RPGs to evolve now that you guys have made combat and class systems stand out differently than other games?
You've just crushed the evolution of RPGs with this game, gentlemen. Be ashamed of yourselves.
I really think we're pushing in the way of presentation. And so I keep coming back to that, but it's like we've built an engine that can handle all this crazy animation systems of the most top tier action games that are out there. We could build all those, but we're building an RPG. So now what we've got is a system where we can say anything we like or can dream of that we want our character to do, whether it's fluid movement or all sorts of crazy jumping and animating and looking and interacting with NPCs, we can start doing that type of stuff. So we've kind of just blown the top off of our potential. So it's just a matter of we have so many things we can do in RPGs. What's the next thing that we want?
Right.
And we can only probably do, 20 of them out of the thousands that are out there. So it's really an exciting time for RPGs just because of all the challenges that we now have.
Sure. And then, Ken, you actually had a great point earlier where you were looking to another genre of games that could potentially be an indicator of the future of the RPG genre as well.
Yeah, I would like to say to Falcon, you and I over beer sometime because I can go on at a long time. I can go on real. I think this is a question where I would like to run a seminar on it. It is shocking how important the Dungeons and Dragons idea of a group of people around the table with different archetypes, how that has shaped gaming. There's a good reason why there haven't been many good science fiction role-playing games. There are a lot of different kind of games that genres that don't exist well as role-playing games. For example, Deus Ex. For example, I think is all by itself, really, and that kind of thing. They don't lend themselves to role-playing games because it is the degree to which we all share some understanding of what our roles could be. And it's that gracefulness with which we pick up, I'm a brute, or I'm a magic user, or I'm an elf. It's those familiar tropes that make it easy to quickly enter into a fantasy setting. And if you take another kind of a fantasy setting, even science fiction, that doesn't have rules that everybody understands, it's impossible to get past the exposition.
Sure.
So one of the things is we dodge exposition by using dragons and zombies. And the great thing is you get to start playing, Falcon. That's the best thing. What I think you imply with indignance is that we're doing too much of it. And I would say that you're right, but you should look for boutique independent games for places where that gets done, because it needs to be easily accessible for casual people to play it. But I think you're right. I think we ought to be trying to do some other things. And by the way, that's why we were talking earlier about how Fallout 3 is a very interesting setting, because it lets you dress in your everyday clothes and speak in your everyday voices. See, that seems to me as a setting which is not impossible.
Sure.
You know, we all understand the fantasy of radioactive ants. That is so amazing. They're big. They have to. Everything's big.
Yeah.
You know, so that you understand those rules, and therefore you can start playing quickly.
Right. So in a sense, you want to make. I think he's assuming that you need to be doing things bigger, but in actuality, we need to personalize the experience a little more. Would make this a little bit better.
But we use those tropes all the time. Like, we always say things like, when we're playing SWTOR, it's like, oh, I have such and such character.
I'm a healer.
Yeah, I'm a healer.
Yes.
It's like I'm a mage, or I'm a paladin. Like, you associate it with, previous games that you've played, so that it's a shorthand, so I don't have to say, well, I have healing abilities, but I also do a lot of damage. You just, it's understandable.
Yeah,
I also like dragons, so whatever.
Yeah, dragons are amazing, but and Star Wars, what they did great, and I think that the in game, the DPS, the tallies and things like that. I don't think there's a lot of data readily available so far, but BioWare did say when they were launching this game that all of these characters will be within 3% DPS of each other, because we want it to be more about the experience as a whole and less about your like you are a healer and you must heal, which means that you are a glass cannon, and if you get hit once, you are going to die. So I think that things like that are definitely, they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, they do feel a little bit more balanced. That is interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about Bee's Daddy, Morgan? Because that's just a funny name. Bee's Daddy.
Bee's Daddy. We did talk a little bit about this, but I think he has a very sort of specific question. So, are numbers, stats, levels, DPS, etc., a necessary aspect of RPGs? Would an RPG be an RPG without leveling up? Like, is leveling up, I guess is what he's asking, the nugget of what an RPG is? Can you have it? Would you call it an RPG if there was no leveling? I don't
feel like I level in my real life.
If you were not trapped in the dialogue of all computer games. Matter of fact, the best games of all are ones that have no numbers and that have no leveling up, and they're live action role playing games, but they have a different interface and a much more vivid and emotional relationship between the players. But when it comes back to the computer, what the computer does is computing, and that's why paper and pencil games, they don't have that intervention of the computation. So that's why people moved, I think, to a great deal away from tabletop gaming to that computation. And also exposing those numbers to a certain kind of person is very important. On the other hand, I think that's not the only way to have fun. I think hiding the numbers, hiding all of that junk ought to be a fun way to make a role-playing game that isn't recognizable as a role-playing game. By the way, that's an even more important goal. I'd love to make a role-playing game that no one realized was a role-playing game. Animal
Crossing?
Animal Crossing. Totally
So good.
awesome role-playing game. And I think that thinking about ways to create the experience that's like a role-playing game and getting rid of the worrying about the classifications for publishing and marketing, that's a good move to go.
Right.
That's a really good point, because we show level on the player in Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, and we show the damage that you're doing and show the weapon damage and your armor stats, but you could probably turn that off. We could have probably let you turn that off, and it would still be just as much fun a game to play. I think all you would want to know is whether a sword is better or worse, but like Yeah, I think originally my answer was going to be no. You need to level up to have an RPG, but I think you just convinced me I can probably turn that off.
That was well done, sir.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting point that you bring up. If you do remove stats from weapons, what's the incentive of a loot drop in a game? You know what I mean? Why outside of aesthetic changes was like, man, I really wish this sword was covered in fire. Holy shit, that sword's covered in fire over there. I'm going to go get that sword because it's covered in fire. But outside of the aesthetic changes, I think that stats are necessary, at least in a weapon system or a combat system, right? I mean, outside of the leveling up of the character, I think there needs to be stats in that type of thing.
There needs to be, but I think in the real world we don't have stats necessarily. Like I can't tell you that one sword is more strong than the other or sharper than the other, but there's probably ways we could test that in the real world and start giving you those numbers. So maybe you don't get the instant feedback of knowing that it's a damage 7 sword versus with 5 piercing versus a damage 12 sword with 10 piercing. You might have to go to somebody to sharpen your sword, and then it's just automatically sharper or not. I don't know.
Because you do know,
That's
like when you're
interesting.
playing a game, you fight the same enemy, and all of a sudden it takes 3 swings instead of 4, which it previously did. So I mean, there even more than the stats, you have that sort of feedback.
Sure.
about the
I like
stats.
stats, though. I mean,
I
don't.
know,
me too.
I'm
I
arguing
know.
the wrong side
I'm a
right now. I'm
sucker
playing
for-
devil's advocate
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I love the stats. I
Plus
need 'em.
3 willpower? Sign me up.
Right. Even if I don't need it, it just sounds awesome that I have 3 more willpower than I did before I had this tunic.
Obviously better.
But
Yeah.
Brad, speaking as Socrates, why does a role-playing game have to go on for 70 hours? Why couldn't you have a wonderful role-playing experience, a single room, no levels, no characters, and you just play it over and over again because it's such a compelling part of, say, one of the Star Wars movies that you always wondered if it could go a different way. I've always thought that there are different ways to look at that kind of stuff. I'm not ready to build or market them, but I think it's not a completely insane question. Matter of fact, probably it's the kind of question that generates Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning that's saying, why are we always doing it the same way? And if somebody can not only find the thing that they can imagine would be more fun, but actually find a concrete solution to it, that's where buckets of money are buried.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Morgan, we have time for one more. Why don't we ask Cooler Dude's question? Cooler Dude. Who is, I'm sure, over 18 with that particular username.
I'm sure.
Otherwise, he'd be coolest dude.
Yeah, right?
Recently, we've seen games from other genres take elements from the RPG genre, such as the level up system, to revolutionize their own genre. Do you see the RPG genre taking elements of other genres and revolutionizing itself to the same extent? Now, we have talked about the combat
Yes.
that-
Yeah, right.
in that, but can you imagine any other games that you've maybe liked or enjoyed even in this past year that you want to steal stuff from?
That's basically what the question is.
Oh, man.
Who do
At its
you want to
core.
steal from?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is with these things, everybody steals from each other, which I love. I love when you talk to a developer and they're like, so-and-so stole that from us. And I'm like, and who did you steal the chainsword thing from? Huh? Where'd you get that? I mean, you always have, like,
There are
everyone
at
uses
least
each other for inspiration.
2 other genres that I've always wanted to spend a lot of money, that is somebody else's money, on doing. One is the intersection set of a strategy game with a role-playing game in which you role-play a ruler. And you can also be a hero, because Conan was a king, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
And I think also a colonization type game. I've always thought that the excitement of going to the new world and having everything want to eat you, the kind of a world that I can imagine, and you would do that in a science fictional sense, or like, wow, this is a very nice spaceship that has this old dead alien in it. I wonder if it's safe to go in here and stick my face onto that egg.
Don't go in there, Lawrence
Yeah,
Fishburne.
perfectly safe to lick the egg. So what I'm saying is I do believe that there are a number of other places, but I don't have time enough or money enough or energy enough to make all those other games.
There was a great RTS/RPG called Spellforce that came out. I gave it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, a German
good stuff.
creation. Yeah, Spellforce.
Spellforce, and there was a Spellforce
Yeah. That was right. That is actually, these things exist. Maybe they simply need a little AAA love or
Yeah.
presentation. Joe is the master of presentations.
I wonder, and this has nothing to do with presentation so much, but like RPGs for me are so much about going out and exploring places and discovering new places and fighting new enemies and never really returning back home. And there's a lot of games that are all about maintaining your home and like the Farmville games, like getting a garden, and even Animal Crossings. I love like shaking trees and getting fruit and sort of managing relationships back in town. So I wonder how much you could do sort of building that game up alongside an RPG also, and sort of like doing like a hunter-gatherer game or something
Because
like
the farming, there was like a farming genre, like Harvest Moon.
Yeah.
What was that game? He's not paying attention to me. Pay attention to me.
Yes, what? Sorry.
There was the game
Getting direction from my producer.
with the Lost Ocean. Oh, God, I'm not
Lost in Blue.
Lost in Blue.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. And so there are games like that, but I feel like we haven't seen them in a long time. And maybe with mobile, we'll see a resurgence in that kind of game.
Don't forget
Rune
Farmville.
Factory, Harvest Moon. Those
I
are
mean,
great
there
ones.
are other places where and other audiences that would like to have some of these experiences, and I'll be very surprised if I don't see role-playing games in the social game space. You know, they just have to learn how to translate them.
I cannot agree more. I mean, there is the ability. You already have the role-playing game that is your life is already connected to all of these other people. Why not just throw a game skin on it? But that's another conversation that could go
I
on
would
forever.
cheat.
Exactly. Quickly, what does Project Copernicus mean to you?
Luckily, we are in a position where we must tell you we know and we won't tell. Ha ha ha! I have a secret and I won't tell.
That was
Ha,
quick.
ha,
Thank you
ha,
for
that,
being quick.
I win. I've crushed you.
It's our secret sauce, really, is what it is.
Because I have the moral high ground because we can't tell you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's your secret sauce. So there is mayonnaise in this game, is what you're saying.
Aioli.
Got it.
Aioli,
Got it.
definitely garlic.
Fair enough. Morgan, as always, thank you for being here. Gentlemen, you guys have a game that is about to be in the hands of people. So thank you for taking the time out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule. Before we leave, though, and I know this is like asking you to pick your favorite child, but if people had one takeaway from Reckoning, what do you hope that takeaway is? I know that you've worked so hard and put so much into it, but what do you want people thinking about if they could only think about one thing when it comes to this game?
I want them to weep bitter tears and lie awake at night saying, why didn't I force someone to make a better combat system? Why wasn't I in the streets, with the other people, in the square, building barricades,
Okay. And Joe, now that Ken's taken your answer.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ken.
I win. Ha ha.
Really, it's I want to send them onto YouTube and make some combo videos and start sort of intersecting with the
Well
fighting
done.
game community. So like, hey, check out this combo I did in Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning.
Right.
Can you do anything better in your game? And it's get some wars going sort of between the two communities.
So the game is actually in stores as of yesterday, so go out and buy it. And if you've already bought it, buy another one because these guys have worked really hard on it and they would appreciate it. And as usual, we appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for being here as well. New episodes of Feedback every week at g4tv.com/feedback. Can I get my copy signed? Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
Of course.
I'll give you a tissue sample.
What?
Not as creepy as I thought it was going to be.
Sigh.
Used.
That was awesome.